Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? We hope that you're well. I've been away for a long time. I tried to make some videos a couple of weeks ago, and one or two things were not correct. So, if you exclude that attempt of 2 or 3 weeks ago, then I haven't made videos for going on for a year. Not quite, but going on for. And with that in mind, I say it's good to be back. I think we're going to be making many videos in the days and weeks and months to come. Maybe we'll see how it goes. There's certainly a lot to talk about. And before we get into this video, I'd just like to say, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Like this video, it's important for the algorithms. Share it so that people know when we're talking sense, that they hear it. It's important that everybody should receive the good message, and subscribe to the channel. Excuse me sniveling, I've got a little bit of a runny nose. I'm not sure why, because summer has hit here in Van der Kloof, in the Upper Karoo, Northern Cape, at the Van der Kloof Dam on the Orange River. So it's quite warm. In fact, maybe I've got a little runny nose because of all the air conditioning I've got going. Anyway, guys, I want to talk to you very briefly about 3 reports that came out after the Durban riots of last year. I thought that this had been covered. I thought that it was a well-known thing. In my mind anyway, had it that I had produced videos on this subject, at least one. But the other day the subject came up, and a couple of people were talking about it as if they were unaware of it. So it's such an important subject. I want to cover it today as the very first, or in the very first video, excluding the weak attempts that we have done for almost a year. Okay, so I'm going to read to you from these 3 articles. They're all in the Daily Maverick, if I'm not mistaken. The first one is written by Heidi Swart, and it was written on the 7th of July 2022. So that's this year. Today is the 5th of October 2022. Meaning that she's written the article a year after the riots in Durban, which were from the 8th to the 14th of July 2021. Again, excuse me. Daily Maverick. Cash, guns, ammo, comms. South Africa on the verge of another insurrection, security experts warn. And I'll read you verbatim the first paragraph, and then we'll skip a bit. The government was warned about the July 2021 riots months in advance. They didn't listen. Daily Maverick spoke to several sources with ties to the State Security Agency, Police Crime Intelligence, the military, and the Hawks. All spoke on condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of their positions, their jobs. They predict a terrifying scenario, a repeat insurrection likely driven by the pro-Zuma RET, that is to say Radical Economic Transformation faction within the ANC and government, and marked by guerrilla-style sabotage. The aim: to keep Jacob Zuma and his allies implicated in the state capture inquiry out of jail. Right. So, on the night of the 12th of July, sorry, I'm trying to simplify what she's written here. A band of men secretly broke into the Massmart warehouse on Queen Nandi Drive in Durban. Queen Nandi, I believe, was the Nandi was the mother of Shaka, but I didn't know that she was a queen. Perhaps I've got something wrong. In any case, they shut off a band of men secretly break into the Massmart warehouse, shut off the CCTV cameras, and escape with survival gear, tents, generators, stuff you need to live rough for weeks, explains a source in the security sector. Then the source says word went out on WhatsApp that the building was unguarded and open for business. Chaos ensued on the 13th, the following night, as looters ransacked the store, carrying off large appliances by the truckload in broad daylight. With all the attention on the blatant looting, the theft of the previous evening went unnoticed. 3 independent sources with ties to the police, the Hawks, and the State Security Agency told us about the quiet break-ins. They explained that it was one of 5 events, or 5 series of events, the break-ins being one of 5 different sorts of events that took place around the time of the 2021 unrest that were probably aimed at laying the groundwork for a future insurrection. The 2021 looting was a dry run, and the thefts that took place during the riots were a part of gathering supplies and weapons to equip a small army. This is what our spy boffins say. The Hawks, State Security, the police, crime intelligence. Apparently they spoke to crime intelligence and the military. So that first event took care of the gear. Event number 2 was all about the guns. 2 containers of AK-47 rifles, not destined for South Africa, so in transit, went missing when Transnet suffered a cyber attack. At the time, I remember putting that on my WhatsApp group. I have a big WhatsApp group, 3 actually, one for people overseas, one for people close to Mr. Miller in South Africa, and then Saitlander's leaders, which is a very big group. And I remember talking about that. I was ill in bed, very, very ill, but that was such an outstanding event that we covered it. All of a sudden, out of the blue, as things were going wrong, haywire in Durban and other parts of Natal, a little bit in Johannesburg too, the east of Johannesburg, lo and behold, Transnet suffers a cyber attack. Then, number 3, the bullets. Specifically, the 1 million+ rounds of ammunition stolen during the July 2021 riots after the 1 million+ rounds were moved under suspicious circumstances to a depot near the Durban harbour with scant security measures in place. Number 4, the comms. Several radio stations were stripped bare of their equipment. On the surface, this might seem like straightforward looting or an attempt to disable communications within the community and disrupt daily life. But there's a more sinister element, explains the intelligence specialist. The looters also made off with repeaters, devices that capture fading radio signals, boost them, and retransmit them. And finally, number 5, the cash. Around the time of the riots, 120 million rand in cash was stolen from more than 1,200 ATMs in just 1 week. That money still hasn't been retrieved. Well, that's a bit obvious. Then they're quoting again the various people that this journalist has interviewed, from State Security, the Hawks, Police Crime Intelligence, the military, and Standard Police. That's how I had it. 5 different sources. So they quote again one of the people. The the ATMs were bombed, ripped out of the wall. What you have is enough cash to pay an army. Okay. The stolen guns and ammunition, say sources, indicate some level of organization at play. Right. So we've got a rough idea of what's going on here. The suggestion is that it may be that the radical economic transformation, the Zuma faction within the ANC and government, may be preparing for another insurrection of some description. Now we have another report also in the Daily Maverick, this one by Des Erasmus, from the following, from the 8th of February 2022. So roughly a half a year, not quite a full year like the previous report, a half a year after the events. Monday's release of a presidential panel report on the deadly and costly July 2021 riots confirmed what we already knew, that the country's bureaucratic security apparatus failed emphatically in the face of its biggest test in post-apartheid South Africa. Of course, the spooks might say, we have never known what their biggest challenge has been, because such operations are classified. So how can you say this was our biggest challenge and that we failed it? Goodness me, we're the ones who stopped the terrorist attack of 74 Boeing jumbo jets. But the fact that tens of thousands of people went on to looting and rioting rampage and wiped 50 billion rand from the fiscus, left at least 342 dead. The latest, or the highest figure, I should say, that I've seen is 513. Now, I don't know if that 513 is correct or not. I merely mention it. He says 342. I've seen figures 380 something or 390 something, very close to 400. And then I saw a figure not so long ago that said, all told, now that we've had a chance to tote up the numbers of 500, and I have an idea whether it was 513. Who knows? Who cares? It was hundreds. And the loss of more than 100,000 jobs is a failure in any security cluster's books. What makes matters even worse, or laughable, cringeworthy, or tragic, is that documents, including a state security agency report dispatched to the Office of the National Intelligence Coordinating Committee. All of these things, I mean, I don't know. Do you think the Americans have as many spy intelligence agency things as we do? The Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Intelligence, the Intelligence Coordinating Committee, the Presidential, the Office of Intelligence in the Ministry of the Presidency or something. It never ends. I can tell you some interesting stories about that. About that sort of thing. That a department fails, so you just build another department on top of it. So this report by this guy, I'm not going to go into much detail, suggests that these agencies had a very good idea that these events were going to take place, and that they were either so incompetent or so spiteful toward one another that somehow the information didn't get to the right place, or it didn't get to the right place to be used, or it got to the right place and it wasn't used. And that goes to the theme of the previous article from which I read, inasmuch as that previous article is suggesting that somebody is preparing for a war. an insurrection, whatever you want to call it. And the second article is suggestive that perhaps, maybe, possibly, that exercise in stealing all of that gear to prepare for another similar event was done with the aiding and the abetting of the entire security cluster. That one way or the other, not the police, not the hawks, not crime intelligence, not the state security agency, not military intelligence, nobody intervened. Even though there was apparently an abundance of information suggesting that big things were going to happen on particularly, but not only, the 13th of July. I remind you that all of this began on the 8th of July. And it ran until, did I say earlier, the 14th? It ran from the 8th to the 16th. Here, in this third article, which is also from the 7th of July. You remember that our first article was Daily Maverick, 7th of July 2022. The second article was from the 8th of February, so prior. This third article is also from the 7th of July. And it doesn't say who wrote it, it just says Daily Maverick. And I'm laughing here. It says that, I don't know, it's alluding to how the majority of the deaths, and these guys are saying only 281 died, which I don't believe is correct, certainly not correct. I think that the reason that they haven't put the author's name here is because it's a junior staff writer. And I think that this junior staff writer has been lazy and has done their research by looking at information from months before, rather than doing fresh research. You know, what's the latest? Any scouts around? Has anybody got any? No. They went to the time and the place, as it were, when there was the most coverage, during the time of the events and immediately after. 281. But that 281 figure has been exceeded by reputable sources long since. And they just say the majority of these deaths were looters, crushed in stampedes while trying to steal goods, or killed by other looters whilst fighting over stolen goods. Perhaps I'm a bad person, but that to me is just funny. This article doesn't particularly suggest anything nefarious or sinister in intelligence circles, but I found it quite interesting because it's got a lot of photographs, and those photographs remind me of the first impressions that I had during the events. Of two things. Number one, that the police were thin on the ground. Number two, they permitted people to get away with the the theft and robbery. Not everybody all of the time, but by and large, they stood by and watched. And one can't help but wondering, when looking at all of these photographs, if that doesn't also go to the suggestion that it may all be deliberate. And now I'm going to wrap up very briefly, because this has been a long 20-minute video, by saying to you, we live in a time now. Today is the 5th of October, I think I mentioned that already, 2022. A time in which the things that Mr. Miller has taught us over 20 years, I'm a newcomer, but from the very beginning, were at one stage extraordinary. And it wasn't absurd that some people may reject those things. I first became aware of the prophecies on the 17th of February 2001. In roughly that week, maybe a few days later, I read the first English version of Adrian Snyman's books. And I have to tell you that even I rejected some of what I read. It was just too much. But we now live in a world in which what Adrian Snyman has written, what Sina van Rensburg prophesied, what Mr. Miller has endeavored to educate us for 20 years or whatever, is more realistic and more feasible in the minds of many people. Many people now believe that there could be a terrible series of riots for 8 days, beginning on the 8th of July 2021 in and around Durban, and particularly but not only the coastal towns of KwaZulu-Natal. And I think that if you listen to those articles, if you're one of those people who's unfamiliar with them, you may think to yourself, hearing that for the first time, that all of these big Lani security, intelligence, secret agents, that they're suggesting that this was done for the purposes of a follow-up event. It must give some impetus to preparing for further chaos, insurrection, anarchy, plundering, pillaging, marauding, what is known as rapine, where you just take and use up and consume and destroy and everything that you can lay your hands on. Yeah, this is the first video in a long time. I hope that it's been well enough structured and I haven't rambled too much. But I believe that we'll be doing some more shortly. And I hope that you got something out of this, especially if you were one of those people who'd never read those articles and was blissfully unaware that the people who should never agree with us are convinced that there is more of that to come. There you go. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.